He walked into the UFC and did something almost nobody in the history of the sport had ever managed. He beat his opponent so completely and so quickly that he barely got touched. He finished grown men in seconds and strolled out of the cage without a single mark on his face. Fans called him a monster, a cheat code, the scariest man in the entire sport. But behind that undefeated wrecking machine is a story most people have never heard. A boy from a war-scarred corner of Russia, a refugee family forced to start over in a foreign country with almost nothing, and an illness that nearly ended not just his career, but his life. This is the story of Khamzat Chimaev, and how a young man they call the Wolf clawed his way to the very top of the world. It begins in Chechnya. Khamzat Chimaev was born on the 1st of May 1994 in a small village in the Chechen Republic in the south of Russia. Chechnya is a region that has known more than its share of hardship and war, a place where toughness is not a choice but a way of life. He grew up ethnically Chechen, raised on wrestling, discipline, and a fierce pride in his family and his culture. But as a teenager, everything changed. His family left it all behind and moved to Sweden, starting over as immigrants in a country that could not have been more different from home. A new language, a new world, and nothing handed to them. In Sweden, the young Chimaev poured himself into wrestling and then into mixed martial arts, training obsessively in Stockholm. His nickname says everything about how he fought, Borz. In the Chechen language it means wolf, and he lived up to it, hunting opponents down like prey. He built an undefeated record on the regional scene, and it did not take long for the biggest promotion in the sport to come knocking. And when he arrived in the UFC in 2020, he did not just make an entrance, he detonated. He won 2 fights in the span of just 10 days, something no one had ever done. He took opponents down at will, smothered them, and finished them, all while barely absorbing a single meaningful punch himself. He called his style smesh, his own word for the way he flattened people, and almost overnight he became one of the most hyped fighters on the entire planet. People were calling him the scariest man in the UFC before he had even faced the elite. And then, at the absolute peak of that hype, it nearly all vanished. In late 2020 and into 2021, Chimaev was hit hard by COVID-19, and it did not let go. He suffered serious complications with his lungs that dragged on for months. He could barely train. He could barely breathe properly. At his lowest point, convinced his body might be broken for good, he publicly announced that he was retiring from the sport. The undefeated phenomenon looked finished before he had even reached the top of the mountain. But Khamzat Chimaev is not a man who stays down. He clawed his way back to full health, returned to the cage, and picked up exactly where he had left off, as if the whole nightmare had never happened. If you are enjoying this story of one of the most incredible rises the sport has ever seen, take a second to subscribe. We break down the real lives, the struggles, and the legacies behind the biggest names in fighting every single week. From there, he simply refused to lose. He fought an unforgettable war with Gilbert Burns, a bloody, back-and-forth battle that is still remembered as one of the best fights in years. He submitted the former champion Robert Whittaker in a single round, tapping out a man who had never been submitted in his entire career. Fight after fight, opponent after opponent, the record stayed perfect. And in August of 2025, he finally got his shot at the middleweight championship of the world against the reigning champion, Dricus du Plessis. He dominated, and he took the belt, pushing his record to a flawless 15 wins and 0 defeats. The refugee kid from Chechnya was now a UFC world champion, still undefeated and still barely touched. Through all of it, Chimaev never lost his grip on where he came from. He is intensely private and deeply religious. He married quietly back in Chechnya, and he remains fiercely close to his mother and his family. He carries his Chechen identity everywhere he goes and has spoken about returning home when his fighting days are done. That loyalty also includes a close association with Chechnya's leadership, something that has drawn criticism outside the region. As for the money, his net worth is estimated at around $4 to $5 million, which is actually modest for a champion of his fame, mostly because his story is still so young and the biggest paydays are only just beginning to arrive. But think about the distance traveled. For a boy whose family landed in Sweden with almost nothing, simply becoming the best in the world is already a staggering achievement. So where does it go from here? Now that he is champion, the questions flip around. The man who terrified everyone must now defend against everyone. He has looked untouchable so far, but every champion carries a target on his back, and this sport is full of hungry challengers waiting for the very first crack in the armor. The wolf has climbed all the way to the summit. The only real question left is how long he can hold it. So step back and look at the whole journey. From a village scarred by war, to a refugee family starting from zero, to a hospital bed where he genuinely thought it was all over, to the very top of the sport with an unbeaten record. Whatever happens next, the rise of Khamzat Chimaev is already one of the most remarkable stories in the history of combat sports. So here is the question worth sitting with. Is Khamzat Chimaev destined to go down as one of the most dominant champions the sport has ever produced, a man who might never lose, or will someone finally solve the puzzle that has beaten everyone else? Drop your take in the comments, we genuinely want to hear it. And if you want more real stories from the world of fighting, the struggles, the comebacks, and the legacies behind the biggest names, hit subscribe and stick around. We have a new one for you every single week.